Hello and welcome to another episode in the Devlog for my isometric colony simulator. It's been a few weeks since the last one, so we're going to just jump straight into this. I have reworked a lot of the backend code on my end. So if you look in the game itself, it doesn't look all too different. I've updated how the beaches are created. So instead of trying to like calculate where a beach should go and filling it up with sand, it now outlines the whole island and any water source that we find. This works pretty well, but I kind of want to fill in these holes to try and have one solid grass surface. Still working on that. I would love some feedback on how that looks. Something else I've implemented is the ability to regenerate the islands, so we can have different islands in the future. Another little feature I've been working on is the exhibitions game mechanic. So this is essentially going to be dungeons. In here you'll be able to get more resources, stuff to upgrade your town, things like that. It's not 100% finished yet, but I like what I've got so far. So I generate these chambers, I then connect them with a straight line, and then offset that line to make it not so straight, and it gives us a nice cave effect. And then I add some light noise to the edges of the circular chambers. No chamber can be connected to more than once, so each of these chambers have a nice link to them, so it's like one seamless flow. You're probably wondering what the grass block and the water tile is. So the grass block will be where you start the dungeon, and the water block will be where essentially either the stairway is down or where the boss will be, stuff like that. And eventually I will populate this with treasure and obviously more mobs. You can navigate around the cave. It all works just fine with the pathfinding. I'm working on adding tile height so that entities will actually render down actually on the ground instead of floating a block above it. If we go into some of the back end side of things, I've created a GameObject, much like modern day game engines. This GameObject is used on entities and on the tiles. So it has its own sibling index system. This will be used for sorting at a later date for rendering. Every GameObject has its world position, its tile position, and the chunk position. You probably wonder what the chunk position is. My system actually lets me generate infinite worlds and infinite chunks, but I've turned it off for now because I don't know how I feel about that. Yeah, I had to do a lot of rewriting on the actual backend. So this function used to be massive. I've managed to condense it down to a singular for loop now, instead of having to do nested for loops for the tiles and then another for each loop for entities. Same thing applied for updating tiles and updating entities. So that's all now condensed down to one singular for each loop. Had to rework how the tiles themselves were rendered on my end. So like, I can now turn the game objects on and off, so we have the enableability check. And I had to manually calculate the placement of the tiles when on the tile objects themselves rather than in the chunks rendering code. This took a little bit to get working. The entity system was a relatively straightforward switch around. So if we pull up the mob, I've moved the pathfinding code to move the entity along the map in into its own update pathfinding function, which is used for just dynamic entities that move. And then I just do my my little debugging right-click check here instead of having a for each loop, checking if it's a dynamic entity and casting it and then running through that. So this is a lot more efficient. What this lets me do is create essentially a hierarchy in the chunk. Chunk is essentially our island, our caves, our exhibition. It's where everything happens. That hierarchy is this GameObjects list. I still haven't got it sorting correctly, so the rendering's still a little bit squiffy. I can kind of get it working, but it's not really efficient. I'm still working out the kinks. So, for example, if I change this to actually use the hierarchy, we'll show you what this does. While it works fine for kind of one entity, so like I can move him behind this tree, and he's actually behind the tree. That all looks good, but the tiles are, because their tile position is technically in front of the trees, they're trying to render on top of the entity that they're actually representing. So if we move the movable entity here, you see these have all rendered on top. Not quite what we want, but if I add multiple of these guys and I try to run it, the frame rate just tanks. So I'm still trying to figure out the best way to handle that. Not quite there yet. I originally toyed around with the idea of render layers for tiles, but when I applied that to the caves, I made the walls and the caves on a different render layer. They would render on top of the entities, and it just got messy, so I decided that this whole GameObject system would be the better way to do it in the future. Yeah, just a lot of back-end changes, a lot of optimizations, a lot of code cleanup. You got the caves. The cave functionality was a lot of fun to write. Although I had to comment it out as I went along. So you can have 5 to 7 caves. They're between 5 by 5 and a 15 by 15 radius. They can never spawn within 20 tiles from either edge of the map. I calculate the center points of these caverns. Make sure none of them overlap, because they cannot overlap. I made it so you don't get those gigantic caves. I didn't want that. I now I apply my little light amount of noise to the edges of the circles, so that gives them a ruggedness. What I then do is I smoothen out the edges the best I can, because before it was all kind of hectic, and I've tried to clean that up a little bit here. I take note of where the center points are. I assign all of the distances, and then I start planning the tunneling. So we grab the first chamber, we get its distance, we get the closest chamber to that one. So it always looks for the closest unconnected chamber. And I use Prim's algorithm to find the closest unconnected chamber. And once I have all of these chambers connected up, I can start doing the tunneling. So I grab the center point of my first chamber, I grab the center point of the closest chamber, and then I start taking the direction that I need to move in. I do something called perturbing, which is basically just essentially offsetting the X and Y, so it's never really a straight line. And then I carve out that tunnel. And then what I do here is I take the two chambers that are the furthest apart from each other, and I go, right, the chamber number 1 will be the starting chamber, chamber number 2 will be the ending chamber. So here I check all the distances, I get and assign the chambers, I take the chambers X and Y coordinates for their center points, and I go, right, here's going to be the start, so we're going to make that grass, here's going to be the end, so we're going to make that water. And yeah, aside from that, it's just a lot of backend stuff. Still playing around with the sorting here. I'm not happy with how it is right now. I do correctly sort. So what I'm trying to do is I take the game object that needs sorting, so I flag the game objects to sort them, and I add them to a list. I then check the neighbors around that for the tiles, because tile is a game object, they can all be added into the same list, and I add any neighbors to that list, and I then go through all the entities, and right now I'm just adding every entity into the list, just for testing's sake, and then I sort it the same way that I am before. That should work, but now I need to update the actual game object hierarchy list. I'm hoping to get that done for the next update. But yeah, that's everything I have this time. I'm honestly putting off the building mechanics because it's a little bit fiddly. I want to make sure I've got the back end stuff the way that I want them before I do that, because then I'll be too far in to make any big changes like that. And yeah, I hope you all enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe, that helps me out a lot. Leave a comment for any feedback. I did note that somebody mentioned that they did like the sine waves that I had before. I could look at bringing those back, maybe not. I'm still on the fence. And yeah, see you all next time.